Tom Brady is number one in yards passing with over 89,000, but Aaron Rodgers now moved into sixth place all time in the NFL with 63,538 yards. He passed Phillip Rivers yesterday in their game. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, and today we are looking at Week 3 games that were played. Today on this episode, we'll do all 1 o'clock games. And then tomorrow I'll cover the rest of the 1 o'clock games, all the rest of the Sunday games all together, and the Monday night game as well. So we'll talk about that then, but today will be all the early games. All right, so let's get started with this episode of Just the Stats NFL, and we're going to start with the Indianapolis Colts at the Tennessee Titans. Colts won this game fairly easily, 41-20, and the Colts now lead the series between the two teams, 40 wins to 22. All right, in this game, top 10. Well, we have Kwity Paye for the Colts in tackles for loss, was able to break into the top 10 with one tackle for loss in this game, tied him for 10th. Actually, he was already tied for 10th, and it put him into tied for 9th spot with Eric Walden with 33 tackles for loss. Next up for Paye is Rob Morris, who has 35. Dwight Freeney, long way away, is with 113 tackles for loss for the Indianapolis Colts to be the all-time team leader in that category. That was really the only stat in this game in the top 10 category. All right, let's look at the game itself yesterday. Starting with the losing team, Cam Ward went 23 for 38 for 219 yards, one touchdown, one interception, and he was sacked 4 times for 23 yards. So a lot of shorter passes. When we're looking at his pass, where his targets all went in the game, out of 23 completions, one pass over 20 yards and it was incomplete. He had three completions on 6 attempts over between 10 and 20 yards, and the rest of them were all under 10 yards. So 20 out of 23 completions were for less than 10 yards in this game. So he wasn't throwing the ball down the field too far, though he only had 3 passes completed out of 5, which may be a good thing, that were behind the line of scrimmage. One of those was intercepted. It was a terrible interception. He just threw it up there, and he didn't look to see where the defender was, and just defender jumped right in there, caught it, and was gone for the touchdown. And his other passes were for minus yards. So behind the line of scrimmage didn't do too well for him. Between the line of scrimmage and 10 yards, he had 1 touchdown and really actually was very competent in that area. 17 out of 22, 17 completions and 22 attempts between the line of scrimmage and 10 yards. So did all right there. You know, he's still coming along. I think he's going to be a good quarterback. He's played some tough defenses still, so not too bad. Now, looking at the quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, Daniel Jones, still playing quite well. He was 18 completions on 25 attempts for 228 yards and 1 touchdown. Now, looking at where his targets went in this game, now he does throw this ball down the field a little bit more, actually quite a bit more, really. He had 1 pass over 20 yards out of 2 attempts for 29 yards. But he did throw for 6 out of 7 between 10 and 20 yards. So he really did try to push the ball down the field a little bit. An interesting thing with him is, now both of these quarterbacks are, right-handed, but Cam Ward does spread the ball to the left side somewhat. He had 9 of his completions went to the left, 9 out of 23. Now for Daniel Jones, 2 completions to his left out of 18. The rest and the vast majority were down on the right side. 11 out of 18 completions were to the right, and then he had another 5 completions down the middle of the field. So he's definitely looking to his right when he's throwing that ball. All right, let's look at the running backs. For Tennessee, Tony Pollard, 16 carries, 45 yards, and he did have a touchdown. So not too bad there. Only not even averaging 3 yards a carry, but did get the touchdown. Now, Jonathan Taylor had another big game, 17 carries, 102 yards, 3 touchdowns. So if you had him fantasy, you're pretty happy. Now, Daniel Jones added another 27 yards rushing to his passing yards, so he didn't do too bad. Anthony Richardson actually came into this game, had 4 carries for -1 yards. Wow. It's interesting. And then in the receiving department, Tony Pollard, going with his 16 carries, also had 2 catches. So he touched the ball 18 times. The 2 receptions were for 14 yards. But looking at Tennessee's, this is a little bit of a disappointment here. Calvin Ridley had 1 catch for 27 yards. He's the guy you would think should be catching more balls. And in fact, Tyler Lockett had 4 catches on 4 attempts. Now, Calvin Ridley did have 7 targets, only 1 catch on 7 targets. Next was Chig Okonkwo, who had 5 catches on 6 targets for 66 yards to lead the team in receptions and in yardage. Rough game. Alec Ayamaner had 4 catches for 38 yards and the 1 touchdown pass. Looking at Indianapolis, though, Michael Pittman had a good game, 6 catches, 73 yards, and a touchdown. So he did break out in this game a little bit. Tyler Warren was a little cooled off in this game, only ended up with 3 catches on 5 targets for 38 yards. So Michael Pittman caught every one of his targets. That was, like I said, 6 receptions, 73 yards. Now, Jonathan Taylor had 3 catches for 16 yards to add to his 17 carries. So he touched the ball 20 times in this game, which is really good, considering there were 36 between receptions and carries, or 36, and he had 20 of them. All right, now looking at the defenses, nobody really stood out too much for Tennessee. Obviously, when you let 41 points, now not all that was on the defense, actually. There was a fumble recovery. No, that was a different game, sorry. But there was, like I said, just the defense played well, I guess I should say that. Nobody really stood out. No sacks in this game for them. No tackles for loss even. That's terrible. Now, Indianapolis, Nick Cross, 7 total tackles, 5 were solo, and he had a tackle for loss. Now, Tyquan Lewis had 2 sacks and 3 tackles for loss, so big game for him. And Kwity Paye also had 1 sack and 1 tackle for loss. And as well as Neville Gallimore had 1 tackle for loss and 1 sack. So they had a big game, 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss. They were in the backfield just too much against Tennessee. So the Colts are now 3-0. Tennessee is 0-3. It's rough for Tennessee at this point in time. Game number 2, Cincinnati Bengals at the Minnesota Vikings. That game was really dominated by Minnesota, 48-10 in that game. It wasn't even really close. I mean, it was already 34-3 at halftime, and then Minnesota tacked on another 14 points in the third quarter and had wrapped it up by that time. It was really quite a blowout by Minnesota. One of the games I did get right. I just thought Cincinnati had almost lucked into both of their wins, and you just can't keep winning that way and expect it. Well, just expect that to keep happening. And obviously with Joe Burrow out, that made a big difference. Jake Browning was in there. Now looking at top 10 numbers in this game, for the Vikings, Well, we'll start with the Bengals. Let's start with them because they were the losing team. Jake Browning did have one touchdown, which ties him for 10th now all time for the Cincinnati Bengals with passing TDs with 15. Not saying much. Next up for him is David Klingler for 9th place, who had 16. Andy Dalton had 204, so they're a long way away. Now for Jamar Chase, he needed 5 receptions to tie Isaac Curtis for 7th all-time in receptions for the Cincinnati Bengals. He did get the 5, so now he has 416, right along with Isaac Curtis. Next up with 417 is Chris Collinsworth. So he should easily get that next week, past Chris Collinsworth. Chad Johnson's number 1 all-time with 751. So Jamar Chase, on the pace he's going, he will definitely catch Chad Johnson, say 3 years or so, maybe less. Now, for the Vikings, Justin Jefferson also had a game. He had 75 yards in this game, which puts him now with 7,632 yards. He just came up short of catching Anthony Carter, who's in 3rd place all time with the Vikings. He only needed 4 more yards. So next week, he'll definitely pass Anthony Carter to move into 3rd place. That is it on the top 10 for that game. Now, looking at the game itself, like I said, Minnesota Vikings 48, Cincinnati Bengals 10. They're both now 2-1. Now, looking at the numbers here. Jake Browning, 19 completions on 27 attempts for 140 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and he was sacked 3 times. Carson Wentz really didn't do a lot better. I guess more efficient for sure. For only 14 completions on 20 attempts for 173 yards and 2 touchdowns. So did pretty well there. Now looking at the running game, let me look at these quarterbacks real quick. Neither one throws the ball down the field. Jake Browning tried it twice, had 1 completion for 28 yards. Carson Wentz tried 1 pass, didn't complete it, and that was it. You really, for Jake Browning, with the receivers he's got, he had 1 completion between 10 and 20 yards on 4 attempts. So he's not even getting the ball beyond 10-yard passes. So not really good at all. On the other hand, Carson Wentz did get the ball down a little bit. He had 5 completions on 9 attempts between the 10 and 20 yards. So he did throw the ball a little bit farther down the field. And he only had he was 2 for 2 on passes behind the line of scrimmage. Whereas Jake Browning was dumping the ball off regularly. They were all completions, but 8 out of 8 on passes behind the line of scrimmage. But that's 8 passes out of your 19, 8 completions out of your 19 completions are all behind the line of scrimmage. I mean, they're not much more than runs, and he's not getting much more out of it as far as the yardage per pass. I mean, he's hardly making 4 yards of completion on these, not even making 4 yards, just under that. So that's going to be something they're going to have to work on, Cincinnati, if Jake Browning, because he is going to be the quarterback. He's going to have to figure out how to get the ball down the field. Sure, the Vikings are happy that Carson Wentz was able to pull out the win, and maybe McCarthy will be back soon. Now, looking at the running backs, rough game for Chase. Terrible, really. 10 carries, 3 yards. I don't know if you can start him in your fantasy league right now. 10 carries, 3 yards. And he did have 4 catches for 17 yards. So he came up with a total of 20 yards in this game. That's not going to cut it for your team. And in fact, really, Perrine had 4 carries for 21 yards to lead the team in rushing with 21 yards. Taj Brooks had 5 carries for 17 yards. So, and nothing special there. Now, on the other hand, Minnesota, Jordan Mason, without Jones on playing, he had 16 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a big game for him. And Xavier Scott also had 8 carries for 30 yards himself. Cam Akers had 5 for 19. So Jordan Mason had a big game yesterday. Now, he didn't have any catches, which I'm surprised he didn't have at least 1, but no catches. So just what he did, everything was on the ground, but with 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards That's pretty good. Now, looking at the passing game for both teams, Cincinnati, Jamar Chase was able to get 5 catches for 50 yards. On the other hand, T. Higgins, 1 catch, 15 yards. Only targeted twice. Jamar Chase was targeted 6 times. For a team that was losing so badly, they still only ended up with 19 completions in this game. Pretty poor, really. Noah Fant also had 5 receptions on 5 targets, but for 26 yards. Now, looking at Minnesota, it's the same situation where the best wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, had 5 catches, but for 75 yards versus 5 for 50 for Chase. And then the same thing in the tight end department. Noah Fant was 5 for 26 for Cincinnati, but TJ Hawkinson was 5 for 49 and 1 touchdown. So the tight end situation went better for Minnesota as well. Now, Jalen Naylor was the 3rd best receiver. He had 3 catches for 37 yards on 5 attempts. So really both teams, neither team had, for a team that scores 48 points, they didn't have a lot of yardage. It's just a very controlled game. Now, Cincinnati did fumble the ball twice or 3 times, had 3 fumbles. They were terrible. They were just terrible. They actually had 5 fumbles. They lost 3 of them. It was terrible. It was not as bad as New England Patriots, but it was bad. I mean, Jamar Chase, Noah Fant, both had fumbles. It was just unbelievable. All right, looking at the defenses. Well, Chris Jenkins for Cincinnati, he did have 6 tackles. 2 of them were solo. He had 1.5 sacks and a tackle for loss. So he had the big game for Cincinnati, the best game, I should say. Now, Ivan Pace had a big game, 12 tackles, 9 solos. So he really was out there. Chaz Chambliss had 4 tackles. 3 of them were solo. He had a sack and a tackle for loss. Jonathan Grenard had 2 tackles for loss. So good game for him as well. Minnesota defense sacked the quarterback 4 times and had 7 tackles for loss. So good game for them. All right, that is a look at the Minnesota Vikings who beat Cincinnati Bengals 48-10. Next game, Pittsburgh Steelers at the New England Patriots. This is the one I was talking about. The New England Patriots now lead this series 19 games to 17. Steelers won it 21-14. This was a game that the Patriots moved up and down the field and twice right at the end zone fumbled it away. It was unbelievable, but we'll talk about it in a second. Now, looking at the top 10 for this game, let me see here. Here we go. Top 10 for this game there's actually nobody to talk about for New England, but for the Steelers. On the team level, Cam Hayward and TJ Watt continue to battle it out for tackles for loss in the lead. And Cam Hayward still holds that lead with 134 tackles for loss. He didn't have any in the game, but TJ Watt did have 2. So he's now up to 130 to 134 for Cameron Hayward. So they are battling it out, and TJ Watt continues to move closer to that number 1 spot. Now, looking at the Steelers, specifically Aaron Rodgers, on the NFL level, not even team, but NFL. Tom Brady is number 1 in yards passing with over 89,000, but Aaron Rodgers now moved into 6th place all time in the NFL with 63,538 yards. He passed Phillip Rivers yesterday in their game. Next up for him, interestingly, and he only needs another 500 yards, a little over 500 yards, and he'll pass the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger. It's pretty interesting that he's playing for Pittsburgh and he's about to pass Ben Roethlisberger for 5th all-time in the NFL. So as well as the passing yards yesterday, Aaron Rodgers also moved past Brett Favre into 4th place all-time in touchdowns passes. He went into the game tied with Brett Favre with 508. He had 2 in the game, so he's up to 510 to move into 4th all-time by himself. Next up for him, which is a little ways away, and I don't know if he'll catch him, but he has a chance this year, is Peyton Manning, who's in third with 539. So Aaron Rodgers needs another 29 to tie. So we'll see if he can make it, get that many touchdown passes. And that is a look at the top 10. Big game for Aaron Rodgers. All right. Like I said, Pittsburgh won this game 21-14. They are now 2-1. The New England Patriots are 1-2. Looking at the quarterbacks, Drake May, he actually had a good game. One bad pass, but he had one bad pass and they had huge fumble at the wrong time. But Drake May was 28 completions on 37 attempts for 268 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. He was sacked 5 times, though. 5 sacks. That's just too many, but that's kind of, you see that so much with the rookies and how they get sacked that way. All right, let's look at those quarterbacks then. This is another one. Neither quarterback throws it down the field too much. Drake May had one pass over 20 yards. It was exactly 20 yards, so he's 1 for 1 passes over 20 yards. Aaron Rodgers was 0 for 2 on those passes, and they weren't even close, honestly. He's primarily dumping it off almost all the time. Anything he threw longer than that, like those 2 passes, they weren't close. When I watched the game, it just didn't seem like they were even went out of bounds or what. They just weren't catchable at all. Now, Drake May passes between 10 and 20 yards. He was 5 out of 9, and he did have a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers was 3 out of 5 and a touchdown, 2 touchdowns actually, and an interception. So he's very good in spreading the ball left or right. There's not a lot of consistency, but he only had 16 completions in this game. Aaron Rodgers was 16 completions, 23 attempts for 139 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Let me bring up this other database here because they do something that what I'm looking at now doesn't do. Let's look at this game here. In this game, New England had the ball for over 33 minutes. Pittsburgh had it for 26 minutes and 40 seconds. It seemed like New England had the ball all the time. The problem they had is they had 4 fumbles they lost. Terrible. And they had an interception. So 5 turnovers in this game. It was horrendous. And the fumbles were at just critical times. Like I said, there was I believe the interception was in the end zone, and then the fumble was by Stevenson at the goal line. Those were 2 times they were down could have scored, and they didn't. It was just a rough game for them in this game. All right, looking at some of the other numbers here, as far as let me get back to these quarterbacks here. So Aaron Rodgers, like I said, 16 completions, 23 attempts for 139 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He was not sacked though, but he only had 23 dropbacks, so he did pretty well. He had a 96.1 quarterback rating. Drake May ended up with a 102.1 quarterback rating. Looking at the running game here, Jaylen Warren, 18 carries for 47 yards, only a 2.61 yard average. But they were really keying on the running game here. New England was because, it was not only keying on the running game, but just everybody's down in the blocks because, Aaron Rodgers is going to just dump it off for the most part. He does not hold on to that ball. He's going to get rid of it. Now, for New England, this is going to really be something. Drake May actually led the team in rushing yardage, 7 carries, 45 yards. Antonio Gibson had 7 carries for 28 yards. Trevion Henderson, 11 carries, 28 yards. And Raymond Stevenson had 4 carries for 18 yards. Now, Stevenson, who had an excellent game last week, started this game, fumbled right almost immediately in the game. I believe if it was not his first, it was his second carry, something like that. Fumbled right away. So he gets benched for a while. Antonio Gibson fumbles the ball as well, and Travion Henderson comes in. But down at the goal line later in the game, they put Stevenson back in right at the goal line. He fumbles it again. So what does this say when it comes to next week? It looked like Stevenson had locked this rushing position down, the running back position down with his play last week. But now after this week, it opens it right back up for Henderson to come back into this and maybe be the guy. Henderson just needs to learn the plays. It seems that his problem last week or the week before, the first week, was not being in the right spot at the right time. So we'll see if he can pick that up, if he does not start actually playing more now that Stevenson has went back to his fumbling ways. Now looking at the wide receivers for New England, Hunter Henry had a big game, 8 receptions, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns. So if you had him, he was the guy. 8 catches on 11 targets. And in fact, Mac Hollins, their other tight end, was 4 for 27. So the tight ends caught 12, had 12 of the total 28 completions. They had 12 of them to tight ends. For the wide receivers, Stephon Diggs had 3 for 23. That's it. So really nobody, as far as wide receivers, had too much here going for them. Demario Douglas had 2 catches on 5 targets, but that's it. Now coming out of the backfield, both Henderson and Stevenson each had 3 catches. Henderson had 19 yards. Stevenson had 38 yards. So that was your receivers as well. All right. Now, looking at the defenses. Well, the defense for Pittsburgh did quite well. On one hand, they caused all these turnovers, but on the other hand, like I said, New England racked up 369 yards. And the only thing that stopped them, honestly, was turnovers. I mean, that's part of the game, I understand, but Pittsburgh was not stopping them by just muscle. It was good plays, I guess you want to say, slapping the ball out. But really, 5 turnovers by New England really cost them this game. They ended up, despite 5 turnovers, they lost by just a touchdown. But looking at the defensive players, for New England, Robert Spillane had a massive game, 15 total tackles, 10 of them solo, 1 tackle for loss. That's huge. Like I said, they did not get to the quarterback. They didn't get to Rodgers at all. Now for Pittsburgh, spread around quite a bit. Patrick Queen had 10 tackles, 6 solo. Now looking at Cameron Hayward, 6 tackles, 3 of them were solo. He had a sack. TJ Watt, 5 tackles, 2 solo. He had 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss. So he had a decent game. And Cameron Hayward caused a lot of disruption in this game. So he had a good game despite maybe the numbers not looking huge. He did have the sack, but he was very disruptive. The other one was, those are the players on defense. So Pittsburgh wins this game 21-14. Next game, Los Angeles Rams at the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles win this game 33-26, a shocker, honestly, when you saw that the score earlier was 26-7, the Rams, and somehow the Eagles pulled it out. It was amazing. To be honest with you, I mean, they came back in the second half. They racked up to 26 points, and in the second half to win this game. They go to 3-0. The Rams go to 2-1. All right, let's look at this game here. Get to that game real quick here. Sorry about that. All right, box score. Yeah. All right, for the Rams, 22 first downs, Philadelphia 19. The Rams had 356 yards against this vaunted Eagles defense, which I guess was not enough because they ended up losing. The Eagles had 288 yards. Rushing game, Rams had 160 yards rushing. Big. The Eagles had 86. Passing game, let me get to this other one for the passing game. Matthew Stafford, 19 completions, 33 attempts for 196 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and he was sacked 1 time. Jalen Hurts, on the other hand, 21 completions on 32 attempts, 226 yards, but 3 touchdowns, sacked 4 times for 24 yards. So they finally opened up the passing game a little bit, and Jalen Hurts proved that he could pass the ball when he needed to, despite the way it looked in the first 2 games. Looking at these 2 quarterbacks, Matthew Stafford didn't get the ball down the field past 10 yards too often. Only had 2 completions beyond 10 yards, 2 completions on 7 attempts. So really could not get the ball down the field. Only had 19 completions in this game. Now looking at Jalen Hurts, completely different kind of game than you see from a lot of quarterbacks. He was 2 for 4 on passes over 20 yards, and he was 5 for 7 on passes over 10 yards. So almost half of his passes were over 10 yards. Way different. He only had 2 passes on 3 attempts behind the line of scrimmage, which is one of those you don't see that often. You see a lot of dump offs, and that was not his way. Obviously, he doesn't need to dump it off as much because he'll just run it himself. So much different looking game for Jalen Hurts yesterday. But, they needed it, and he came through. So big game for him. All right. So back to these quarterbacks. Looking at their numbers, Matthew Stafford ended up with a quarterback rating of 82.4. Jalen Hurts, quarterback rating of 117.4. So a really good game for him. Now looking at the rushing game, Kyren Williams had a decent game. 20 carries, 94 yards, no touchdowns though. Blake Corum added another 53 yards on 8 carries. So really the running game, 31 carries, 160 yards, averaged almost 5.2 yards a carry. Pretty impressive. No touchdowns on the ground rushing, though. For the Eagles, it was all Barkley and Hurts. Barkley, though, only 18 carries is a decent amount, but only 46 yards, just over 2.5 yards a carry, no touchdowns. Now, Hurts, on the other hand, another tush push, 9 carries, 40 yards, and he did have 1 touchdown. As far as receiving goes, Kyren Williams, throwing him in there, he did have 2 catches, 18 yards, and a touchdown. So he ended up touching this ball 22 times and did have 1 touchdown. So he had over 100 yards from scrimmage, touchdown as well. So really good game for him. But the big receiver was Puka Nacua, 11 receptions, 112 yards on 15 targets. He was definitely targeted the most. Devontae Adams was second with 3 catches on 8 targets. So couldn't quite get the matchup as much, but he did have a touchdown reception again. He is moving up in that category, and I'll get over to the top 10 numbers for this game in just a second. So those are your top 2 receivers. Definitely the wide receivers is the people they're going to. Tyler Higbee was targeted twice, but no receptions. Looking at the Eagles receivers, it was, and everybody was wondering who was going to be the guy, but Devontae Smith, 8 receptions on 9 targets for 60 yards and a touchdown. And here's the game everybody's been waiting for. A.J. Brown came through yesterday, 6 catches, 109 yards, and a touchdown. So big game for him. Now, Barkley did have 4 catches, but only 9 yards. So he ended up touching the ball 22 times, but only for a total of 55 yards and no touchdowns. So rough game for those who have Barkley on their team. And he hasn't had a big game yet. All right, let's look at the top 10 in this game, which I should have already done. The Eagles now lead this series 26 games to 20 with 1 tie. For the Rams, and this is NFL level now. Matthew Stafford went into the game in 10th place all-time in touchdown passes with 380. He just needed one to pass Matt Ryan. He got two. So he now has 382. He's moved into 9th all by himself. Next up, quite a ways away, at least right now, is Ben Roethlisberger, who has 418 passing touchdowns. So it's going to be a while before he can catch him. Looking at Davante Adams now, on the other hand, he's already in the top 10 all-time in touchdown receptions. And he had one yesterday, so he now has 105, which would have tied him for Mike Evans, who is the guy he was trying to catch, who's in 9th. But Mike Evans also had a touchdown reception to add one more to his total. So Mike Evans has 106. Davante Adams has 105. Next up for both of them is Tony Gonzalez, who's in 8th with 111 touchdown receptions. Jerry Rice is all-time with 197. All right. Those are the numbers, top 10 for that particular game. All right. Last up for this game is looking at the defense real quick. For the Rams, Cam Curl had 9 tackles, 6 solo. Jared Verse, 6 tackles, 4 solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. Byron Young, another big game, 6 tackles, 4 of them were solo. He had a sack, 3 tackles for loss, so big game there. Now for the Philadelphia defense, Cooper DeJean had 9 tackles, 5 of them solo, and he had a tackle for loss. Jordan Davis had 5 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 sack. All right, let's see what else we have on defense here. I want to look at for the Rams. They had no interceptions. Zach Bond for the Eagles had an interception. All right, that's a wrap on that game, with the Eagles coming from behind, just storming back, winning the game 33-26. Next game up, New York Jets at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Another incredible win for Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers. They win the game 29-27. Baker Mayfield is such a interesting player to watch. His games are fun. Whether you like him, like their team or not, they're always fun to watch. He's something else on the way he plays the game. All right. So like I said, the Buccaneers win that game 29-27. So let me bring it up here. All right. Let's look at the numbers here in this game. The Jets had 21 first downs, Tampa Bay 19. The Jets only had 267 net yards. Tampa Bay had 347. Other big numbers, Tampa Bay had the ball for over 32 minutes. Jets had it for under 28. One of the problems Tampa Bay had was 14 penalties for 124 yards. That's just ridiculous. You can't have that many penalties. They won the game, but that's just too many to really have. All right, let's look at the quarterbacks here. Tyrod Taylor, not too bad. 26 completions on 36 attempts for only 197 yards on that many completions, only a 5.5 yards per attempt. He was sacked 4 times, and he was intercepted once. He did have 2 touchdowns, though. He had a quarterback rating of 92.0. Baker Mayfield had 19 completions on 29 attempts for 233 yards, so 7 fewer completions than Taylor, but 36 yards more passing. He averaged 8 yards per attempt, and he did have 1 touchdown. He was sacked 1 time. He does run around fairly well. Now, looking at these 2 quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield does try to throw it down the field. He was 2 out of 4 on passes over 20 yards. And interestingly, completed them on both sides of the field. So he's not, like we saw with Daniel Jones, typically just a right-handed thrower. He threw to both the left and right side. And then he did complete also only 3 out of 8 from 10 to 20 yards. So not quite as proficient from that shorter distance. Did throw 6 out of 7 in passes behind the line of scrimmage, interestingly. So 6 out of his 19 passes were behind the line of scrimmage. Now for Tyrod Taylor, 26 attempts, not 1 was completed. He only threw 1 pass over 20 yards, and it was incomplete. It was 3 out of 5 on passes from 10 to 20 yards, all to the right side. So really not that great. Also, another guy throwing it behind the line of scrimmage with 6 out of 6 out of 6 behind the line of scrimmage, but 6 out of 6 for a total of 13 yards. Not doing it. On the other hand, Baker Mayfield was 6 out of 7 behind the line of scrimmage, but they were good for 55 yards. So that kind of little dump off pass was much more effective for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, let's look at the running backs. For the Jets, not a good game for their running backs. In fact, Tyrod Taylor, quarterback, had 8 attempts for 48 yards to lead the team, 6-yard average. Breece Hall, 9 carries, had the most carries, but only by 1, but only 21 yards for a 2.3-yard average. Braylon Allen had 6 carries for 30 yards for 5.0 average. No touchdowns there. For Tampa Bay, not much of a game either. I mean, Baker Mayfield had 4 carries for 44 yards. One was a huge run for 33 yards. Just broke away and didn't want to stop. Now, Irving had 25 attempts, so he did get the carries, but he only had 66 yards. 2.64-yard average, really not that good. They were really keying on him, and the Jets did a good job holding him back. No touchdowns there either. Now, as far as the receivers go, Garrett Wilson did have a good game, which was nice to see for the Jets with Taylor throwing the ball. 10 receptions on 13 targets. He was definitely the guy that they were looking for. 10 receptions, 84 yards, and 1 touchdown. No catch was longer than 17 yards, so he really did have a decent game there. Breece Hall, coming out of the backfield, had 4 catches for 31 yards, so he did add a little bit there in the receiving game, but no touchdowns either. Allen Lazard came out of nowhere, had 2 catches, 13 yards, and 1 touchdown. Those are your top receivers. Looking at the Buccaneers, I tell you that Emeka Egbuka is really good. He had 6 catches, 85 yards on 8 targets. He was tied with Mike Evans in targets. They both had 8. Mike Evans only caught 4 of his for 33 yards, but one again was a touchdown. You know, the guys that like Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, they just somehow are always have an opportunity to be open in the end zone, and when they are, they usually catch the ball. Irving came out of the backfield, 4 catches, 33 yards. Like I said, so he ended up with 99 yards total in the game, and he touched the ball 29 times. That's a lot. 29 times and didn't quite make it to 100 yards. So at least he did help out somewhat with the 99 yards and that amount of carries, especially if you're in a PPR and you get points for the receptions. Sterling Shepard had a good game, 4 catches on 5 targets for 80 yards. And then Rachaad White, 1 catch for 2 yards. All right. That's a look at that. Looking at the defenses. Wait, yeah, and then I got to do the top. I'd like to do the top 10s first, but I'll do the defense here and we'll go to it. For the Jets, Jamien Sherwood had 11 total tackles. 5 of them were solo. Interception-wise, no interceptions for them. Looking at the tackles for loss for the Jets, Brandon Stevens had 2 tackles for loss to lead the team as far as that goes. And then for Tampa, Vontae David, he's a great player. 11 tackles, 7 solo, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss. Yaya Diaby had 2 tackles for loss, as well as Antoine Winfield also had 2 tackles for loss. And then when we're looking at interceptions, Jamel Dean had 1 interception, which he ran back for a touchdown. So returned 55 yards for a touchdown. Pretty good. All right. let's look at the top 10 in this game. The Jets now lead this series 10 games to 4. Looking at the Jets first, Quentin Williams needed one tackle for loss to move into 5th by himself, and he got it. So he is now in 5th all-time by himself with 56 tackles for loss. Next up for him is Calvin Pace, who has 65 for 4th place. Now, 1st place only has 80. So there's an outside chance he can reach, not this year, obviously, a year or two, he might catch Sean Ellis, who's number 1 all-time with 80 tackles for loss for the Jets. Now, for the Buccaneers, on the team level, top 10 team, Rachaad White was able to move into 10th place, knocked Ronald Jones the second out of 10th place all-time in rushing yards. White needed 11 to catch Jones, 12 to pass him, and he got 12 yards exactly. White now has 2,175 rushing yards to move into 10th all-time. Next up for him is Eric Rhett in 9th with 2,853. So he needs, 79 yards to pass Eric Rhett. I don't know how many games it'll take him at, he doesn't, not being the leading running back. I don't know how many games it'll take him. One more, another stat is Chase McLaughlin was able to pass James Wilder for 9th all-time in the points scored for the Buccaneers. He now has 288 to move into 9th all-time. Next up for him is Ryan Suckup, kicker, who had 384. So unlikely he catches him this year, but definitely next year. And one more, and that is, this is an NFL record, and that is Von Miller got one. I'm sorry. I take that back now, Von Miller. Lavonte David. I told you he had a big game. He had one tackle for loss, and he now has 171 to move into 9th all-time in the NFL as far as tackles for loss go. He's tied. Actually, he's tied for 7th. He was in 9th. He's now tied for 7th. Next up is Von Miller, who's also been playing but didn't have a sack. He has 172. I think Von Miller actually did have a sack, but he has 172. He's in 6th all-time by himself. So that's the next target from Lavonte David. Julius Peppers in 5th with 175. So those are your top all-time players. So in the top 10, you've got 2 active players in tackles for loss right now. You actually have more, Calais Campbell, but I don't have him included here. All right, let's move on to the next game, Las Vegas Raiders at the Washington Commanders. Commanders won this game 41-24. Really did a really good job stuffing the running game of the Raiders. And this series is now tied at 8 games apiece. Looking at the Raiders, Max Crosby needed 1 sack to tie Ike Lassiter for 4th all-time for the Raiders, and he got it, 1 sack. So he now has 61.5. He's tied with Ike Lassiter. With that number, next up is Ben Davidson, who has 62. So he needs a half a sack to tie, 1 sack to move into 3rd all-time in sacks for the Raiders. Greg Townsend has the most. He's number 1 with 107.5. Now for the Commanders, Terry McLaurin I think he was robbed on that touchdown. I actually thought he got the ball in there on that touchdown pass, but they said he was down, at the 1 or 2 yard line. But he had 74 yards in this game. He should have had a touchdown, like I said, but he didn't need many yards. He only needed 38. He got 74. So he's now 5th all time by himself. He passed Bobby Mitchell for 5th place. He now has 6,528 yards. Next up for him, which is quite a ways away, probably won't catch him this year, is Santana Moss, who's in 4th place with 7,867. So that's probably next year for Terry McLaurin as far as that number goes. Now in the tackles for loss for the Commanders, Darren Payne needed 1 to tie Jonathan Allen for 2nd all-time for the Commanders, and he got it. So they both have 60 tackles for loss. Number 1 all-time is Ryan Kerrigan, who has 119. So quite a ways now for Darren Payne to get to number 1 spot, but he is number 2, tied for number 2 all time. And like I was just mentioning in the previous game, Von Miller actually did have a tackle for loss in this game for the Commanders. He was tied for 7th. He is now 6th, all by himself with 172 tackles for loss. Next up for him is 5th place is Julius Peppers with 175. So he needs 3 tackles for loss to tie and 4 to pass to move into 4th place. Number 1 all-time, Terrell Suggs with 202. There's several players getting close, but all these players that are getting close are been around a while, so I don't know if they can make it. We'll see. All right, let's look at the numbers in this game. This was, like I said, pretty heavily leaned toward the Washington Commanders. Dominated. I really think Gente is going to be a good running back, but I swear he touched the ball. As soon as he touched it, one of the Commanders was touching him in the backfield. I don't know how many times he ever made it to the line of scrimmage before he was already being hit by somebody. And literally, the ball would be handed to him and somebody's trying to grab him. One of the defenders was trying to grab him already. It was just a rough game for him. But the Raiders ended up with 354 yards, net yards. The Commanders had 400. So they did have the yardage. The Raiders had the ball for almost 32 minutes to 28 for Washington. So they had the ball more. But they just couldn't do much with it. Just the not being able to run the ball really hurt them. It was a rough game as far as that goes. All right, let's look at some of the other numbers in this game. Quarterbacks. Well, both of the quarterbacks' numbers look good. Geno Smith, 19 completions, 29 attempts for 289 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was sacked 5 times, though. He had a quarterback rating of 132.7. So this was a much improved game than over last week. Last week, I just felt like I'm just going to throw it and hope somebody catches it. In this game, a much more controlled type of passing game. Marcus Mariota, only 15 completions on 21 attempts, but for 207 yards. So he averaged almost just under 10 yards per attempt. He did have 1 touchdown pass. His quarterback rating was 118.6. So he did do a good job filling in this game, and he ran the ball some too as well. And looking at that, Mariota did have 6 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown. So he all around looked kind of like, Jaden Daniels. He did a good job of imitating him in this one game. Now, Gente, for the Raiders, 17 carries. They did try to hand him the ball. 17 carries, 63 yards, 3.71, and he did break one for 18 yards. So, which kind of tells you that a lot of his other runs he was being stuffed. I don't know how many times he was barely able to make it back to the line of scrimmage. Now, for the Commanders, I think everybody thought it would be Ja'Cory Merritt, but it really wasn't. It was a little bit of everybody. But it was Jeremy McNichols had 4 carries, 78 yards, and he had that 60-yard touchdown run, which was incredible. It looked like he was going to be tackled at the line of scrimmage or so, and all of a sudden he's breaking it and he's running the rest of the way down the field for the touchdown, 60 yards. Marcus Mariota, 6 carries, like I said, for 40 yards, and he had a touchdown. Rodriguez had 11 carries, so he had the most carries in this game for 39 yards. Fortunately, if you had Ja'Cory Merritt, he only had 26 yards, but he did have a touchdown. So that helped. Now, looking at the receivers, Trey Tucker had a big game, which was interesting. Probably you're not picking him up over Jacoby Myers, but he definitely had a better game. Huge game. Trey Tucker, 8 catches, 145 yards. One was a 61-yard bomb. 3 touchdowns. He had all the receiving touchdowns. 9 targets. He was targeted the most. I mean, Jacoby Myers, 3 catches, 63 yards, which is a good average, but only had 4 targets that were thrown his way. Now, definitely you're probably playing Brock Myers, 4 catches, 38 yards, no touchdowns on 5 targets. So not a big game for him really at all. But those are your receivers for the Raiders. So there's a little bit of a disappointment if you got some of these receivers for the Raiders, because it was Trey Tucker, not Bowers or Myers, who were doing, and not even Thornton, who you would have thought maybe would have been the other one. For the Commanders, only 15 completions in this game, so they were spread around too. Really, nobody was big time here. Zach Ertz, 3 receptions, 38 yards. Luke McCaffrey, 3 catches, 56 yards. Terry McLaurin had the best game, 3 catches, 74 yards on 4 attempts, 4 targets. He was targeted the most, but only 4 times. And like I said, I'm really surprised that he did not get a touchdown. They reviewed it and still said it wasn't, but every angle I saw, it looked like he actually got it. Now, Deebo Samuel didn't really have a good game. He started off, looked like big time. The kickoff in the very beginning of the game, ran it back, I think, like 65 yards on the kickoff return, which was nice. But that was basically it. He did carry the ball 3 times for 18 yards. So he had 3 carries for 18 yards, and he had 2 catches for 11 yards. So very bad game, no touchdowns. Unless you're counting yards on kickoff returns, not a good game. All right. Looking at the defenses here. Let me get this game up here. Sorry about the delay there. All right. Looking at the defenses, as far as tackles for loss go, for the Raiders, Max Crosby, he was all over the place. He had a good game. 7 tackles, 4 solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. Devin White, 6 total tackles, 3 of them were solo, and he had 2 tackles for loss. So they had decent games there. And like I said, Max Crosby was really causing a lot of havoc. Bobby Wagner had a big game. Got to the quarterback twice, sacked him twice. This is the biggest problem I saw with Geno Smith, I'm sorry. He had a decent game, but when he is being pressured, he almost looks like he sort of runs around in a circle, and doesn't have his head up anymore as he's trying to figure out how to get out of the way of the defenders coming toward him. And he'll run, and he'll often peel off to the left as if they think he's going to go to the right, which only leads to him throwing it out of bounds or something. Nothing came out of it, but he really does look like he loses sense of where he is and so forth when he is pressured too much. But Bobby Wagner had a big game. Like I said, 11 tackles, 6 solo, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss. Dorrance Armstrong, 5 tackles, 3 solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. So decent game there as well. Looking at interceptions in this game, Raiders didn't have any, as well as the Commanders. No interceptions thrown in the game. So the Commanders win this game easily with a score of 41-24. Next game, Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. This was the biggest upset, crazy game, but Atlanta Falcons now lead the series 37-24. This game, the Panthers, when it came into the game, 0-2, and Falcons were 1-1. The Panthers won the game 30-0 for the Falcons. That's crazy. I don't think anybody predicted that. So before we get too far into the game, let's look at the top 10 in this game. For the Falcons, Bijan Robinson had 72 yards rushing, which was enough to put him into 9th all-time rushing yards for the Atlanta Falcons with 2,671. He was able to pass Haskell Stanback by 9 yards to pass him into 9th place. Next up, and quite a ways away, 800 yards away, is Dave Hampton, who's in 8th place with 3,482. So Bijan Robinson needs another 800 yards, which I think he could do by the end of the year, somewhere around that time. Canales had been sitting, trying to tie Steve Wilkes for wins at 6. Canales had sat on 5 since the beginning of the season. He was able to finally get that next win, so he's got 6 to move into 6th place all time. Next up for him is Matt Rula, who's in 5th with 11 victories. So he's going to need another 5 wins to do it. Now, also for the Panthers, Chuba Hubbard needed he got enough yards to pass Deshaun Foster to move into 5th all-time in rushing yards with 3,343. So he's now 5th all-time for the Carolina Panthers. And next up for him is the great Christian McCaffrey, who has 3,980 yards. So he needs a little over 600 yards, which I think he can definitely get before the end of the year. And he would pass Christian McCaffrey for 4th all-time for the Carolina Panthers. So you got 2 running backs there moving up for their team. And that is it for the top 10s for that game. Now, looking at the numbers in this game, let me get this up here real quick because this game was something else. It was quite a shocker to see Carolina win this way. Looking at the overall numbers, Atlanta Falcons did have 332 yards. Carolina only had 224 in this game. Carolina did hold the ball for 32 minutes to 28 for Atlanta Falcons. Those are some of the general numbers in this game. Now, looking at the quarterbacks, Michael Penix, 18 for 36, 172 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He was not sacked, for a quarterback rating of 40.5. They brought Kirk Cousins in, who went 5 for 7 in the game for only 29 yards to wrap up the passing for the Atlanta Falcons. But this game was horrible. I mean, it was 10-0 at halftime, 20-0 after 3 quarters, and 30-0 after 4. It was just all Carolina as far as that went. Now, looking at the Bryce Young, he was 16 completions for 24 attempts for only 121 yards. Neither quarterback was impressive. No touchdowns. He did not throw an interception, and he was sacked only 1 time, which for Bryce Young is really good. He had a quarterback rating of 78.6, so not that impressive there either. So you're wondering, what in the world? You scored 30 points in this game on that. But looking at the quarterbacks a little bit closer, Michael Penix did try to throw the ball down the field. And being a left-handed player, he definitely tends to throw it more to the left. One pass over 20 yards, it was incomplete, even though he does like to throw it down the field. But he was 4 out of 16, though. Only 4 out of 16 for passes 10 to 20 yards. Not too good. And he had 1 interception in that range. But when I say 4 out of 16, it was 3 out of 8 throwing to the left. So he's definitely leaning more toward the left. So just a very rough game for him all around. Now, for Bryce Young, same thing. All dink passes. 1 pass attempt over 20 yards. It was incomplete. He was 2 out of 5 on passes from 10 to 20 yards. And the rest were all under 10 yards. Neither quarterback was really impressive. These are 2 young quarterbacks. Of course, Michael Penix is only his first full year. Maybe this is just a good learning lesson. I mean, Atlanta looked decent. Their defense looked decent. So what an interesting game this was. All right, let's look at some other numbers in this game. The running backs. Bijan Robinson for the Falcons had a decent game. 13 carries, 72 yards for 5.4 yard average. This is interesting. Nathan Carter had 7 carries for 46 yards, and Tyler Algier only had 1 carry for 4 yards. Chuba Hubbard for the Carolina Panthers, 17 carries for 73 yards. Rico Dowdle, 10 carries for 30 yards and a touchdown. Bryce Young had 2 carries for 8 yards and a touchdown. So that really helped. If you had Bryce Young for some reason, I don't know why you would, but touchdown there would have helped him for sure. Like I said, he had no touchdown passes. So if you had him, you're happy that he got that 1 rushing touchdown. Penix was a sneaky guy to play as far as quarterbacks go, and he had a horrible game. He would have crushed you if you played Penix in this game. Looking at the receivers, Drake London he had 5 catches on 8 targets for 55 yards. Darnell Mooney led in targets with 11, but only had 4 catches for 44 yards. Those are your top 2. Now, Robinson, again, came out of the backfield, so that helped him. He ended up with 11 yards total. He had 5 catches for 39 yards on 6 targets, so not a bad game for him. When you get over 100 yards, he didn't get a touchdown, but obviously it helped that he had 5 receptions in PPR. That would have definitely helped his numbers. Kyle Pitts had another fairly decent game, 4 catches, 39 yards. So those are your top receivers on 6 targets. He was targeted 6 times. So that's a look at the offensive players. Let's look at the defense real quick, and let me find the game on that for this game. So looking at the defenses for Carolina, Christian Rozeboom, 9 tackles, 6 solo. Trayvon Mooring had a tackle for loss. So did Trevin Wallace. Those are your top players. Nothing really stood out. For the Atlanta, Xavier Watts had 9 total tackles. 8 were solo. Caden Ellis also had 9 tackles, 5 solo, 1 sack, 3 tackles for loss. So he had a pretty decent game. And that was really it as far as that goes. Now looking at the interception that was thrown, I believe Michael Jackson had the interception, 1 interception for 54 yards returned. So not bad for him. And Chow Smith-Wade also had 1 interception, which he returned for a touchdown. So there was one of the 30 points was based on an interception return. All right. That is a look at the early games that we're looking at here. Tomorrow we'll wrap it up with the Monday night game as well. Appreciate you listening. Stay tuned. If you like this podcast, please like and subscribe. You can do that at YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. You can also email me at juststats@gmail.com, justthestatsnfl@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook, X, Instagram as well, all with that same name. So I appreciate you listening, and that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL.